Prahlad Kakkar, Feroze Gujral, whom you all know. I've heard of people wearing many hats, but he handles all of that on one hat. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank the LitFest for inviting me. It's my first moderation. I hope I'll be moderate enough for the moderation. I'm delighted to be here for Prahlad. I'm very honored to be here. I first met Prahlad when I was 17 years old. Spent many years with him on all his...
and had the greatest crush on her. And when she decided to get married, all of us
in
Mumbai wore black armband for 1 week.
That is
morning.
true. That is true. They arrived at the wedding very badly behaved and they all cried, which I liked. Usually in life, you have defining moments, and they come from people, from events in your life, and from institutions. And I think Prahlad Kakkar is a 3-in-1. He is all of these things. The main thing about Prahlad is that whoever meets him, first he makes you clean his toilet with a toothbrush, then he gives you a dirty job, then he gives you a great job.
The ladies' toilets with a toothbrush for men who don't understand detail.
That is true. And finally, he makes you family. And I'm very, very honored that for 40 years now, we are family. I'm going to start with Prahlad's, the very beginning, because I think he's always been a storyteller, and I think all his stories have incredible characters. And I wanted to start with the very beginning, with the characters of his youth. His grandparents, his parents, friends, a litany of women, horses, and many other things. After this wonderful talk we heard before us about the army, here's a man who went to military school and never made it into the army.
No, it's
So the
not
other
that I
side.
didn't make it. I was advised by General Chaudhary. Took me aside. I was head boy. I was school captain of Sainik School, Kunchpura. Took me aside and said, I've heard all about you. I've read your reports. And you want to join the army? I said, sir, it's a family tradition. So he says, my advice to you is don't join the army. So I said, why not, sir? So he said, we just fought the 65 war, and we've given them a bloody nose, and I don't think they will rear their ugly head for a little while, not realizing 71 was just around the corner. He said, we are going to be a peacetime army for the next 15 years. And you, as a peacetime officer, are a misfit. You get cashiered for insubordination. So if you were a wartime army, I would advise you join them because you'd make general very quickly. But in a peacetime army, I'm afraid you'll be thrown out dishonorably. So I didn't join the army. But whatever I learned from the army and from my family, I then applied later on in life to all the various projects that I had, all the rejections that I faced, all the failures that I overcame. But thanks to the tradition of the army and my school.
I like to, definitely. I think he has a very strategic mind. I think he's a man of detail. I think he's very persistent, and he only follows his own mad orders. He would never have made it in any kind of format of the army. I'd like to go back to the initial stages of your life, because you were very influenced by your grandfather and grandmother, and later on by, a principal, Mrs. A, who he very sweetly discusses without her full name, an obsessive relationship, and many others who came in your early life before you actually came into film.
But the first memory that I have of my life is the first chapter in the book. And the chapter is called Nalki. And it was the first time that I was actually scarred by an incident where I was thrown out of play school, which was named after Miss Kumkum, because her mother ran the school. So the school is named after her daughter, spoilt, precocious daughter called Kumkum. So we were in Kumkum school, and a friend of mine and me were sort of didn't quite fit in to all the diplomats' children and things like that, because we were slightly different. And we used to hang out by ourselves, and Kumkum decided that she had a crush on Naveen, who was my friend, who was a fair, good-looking boy, looked always like a geek, always have. So she used to follow us around and turn around, and she found a little hideout in the cave, and she insisted on being a part of it. And one day she comes to us and said, "You all are boring, because you keep changing the subject every time I enter, and we'll play a game." So I said, "What game?" And I was all of 5, Naveen was all of 5, she was all of 5. She said, "I'll show you mine if you show me yours." Of course, at that time, I didn't know the difference between hers and mine, so I said, "We're not interested, we've seen ours and we're fine." At which stage, she threw a fit. She says, "I will have you punished for this, if you don't listen to me." So we sort of said, "Shit, let's do it." So we lowered our trousers and showed her ours, and she ran it. And she ran away without showing us hers. And the next thing, we were summoned by the principal's office by a peon saying, "Badi mem saab bula rahi hai." And there she was standing in a corner with big crocodile tears, stamping her foot, saying, "I want, I want, I want." And her mother says, "What do you want, baby?" She says, "I want a nalki like Prahlad and Naveen's." So the mother said, "How do you know they have a nalki?" So she says, "They showed me." End of story. I was considered a pervert by my own family and thrown out immediately out of play school. And I don't think anybody other than Naveen and me have ever been thrown out of play school. So that's where the adventure started. And that, I think, singularly influenced my life to a hell of a lot, saying, never trust a woman when she says she'll show you hers if you show you hers. So it's always ladies first.
I like the line that he has after this chapter, which says that, "I wish I could have told her that she's going to have many nalkis of her own as she grows older."
I wonder where she is.
I think you were thrown out of multiple institutions, Prahlad. So
No, but my grandfather was something else. He was a Major General. He was DDMS of the Medical Corps. And he walked back from Rangoon to Imphal with General Singh's army, and he used to regale us with lots of stories of his walking back from the Burma campaign. So I actually hold him in great awe because he was a much larger than life figure. And I always wanted to join the army and be in the outdoors because of him. And my father was in the signals, he was a colonel. So it became a kind of semi-family tradition. But the rest of the family were all intellectuals. And I was dyslexic. So I couldn't add more than 4 zeros. I didn't know what it was after that. I just couldn't cope with that, kind of with maths and things like that. I always failed. And I joined a military school because of him. And my grandmother, who sent me to Ferguson College after that from Haryana, she says, "You've learnt what you call all the uncouth things that you could from Haryana. Now learn some culture from Pune." And she was a Brahman, and he was the UP Bhaiya, and they ran away in medical college. So, and they were both thrown out of their respective families, thinking that his family thought she was a Zai, her family thought that who is this North Indian guy who's run off with our Sonu Zai Patwardhan. Anyway, so they were both a very, very strong influence in my early days, because my mother, who became a single mother, decided to put us in boarding school. And we lived with our grandparents for a long time. So my grandfather was very instrumental in a lot of the ways that I think and the way I approach a lot of my life. But my grandmother was the one who actually had the insight. And when I didn't want to graduate, I wanted to go straight and join the tea gardens, because it was an outdoor life, and I lived in Dehradun, and it was all about shikar and open air and boxing and this, that and all. That we actually had to complete my college, from Ferguson College, because like in a previous story with was a musician whose mother forced him to graduate. My grandmother forced me to graduate and said that, okay, you do it. The funny thing about graduation was that when I went into Ferguson College in Pune, I had all kinds of subjects to choose from, which I was all hopeless at. And everybody turned around and said, take economics because you might get a decent job after this. But I found a subject to my heart. And that was, the head of department was Major General Paranspe from Sandhurst. And he ran a course called Military History. And so I graduated with honors with Military History, which is the story of wars. And the class started with his first statement, which was, the history of the world is the history of wars. Peace is only an interlude between two wars. So actually, everything about the human race is about the wars that fought and won and lost, and civilizations that fell and grew. So when I did my graduation in military history, my sub was economics. And when I went for a job interview and they asked me, what have you graduated in? I couldn't tell them that I was a graduate of military history because at that time nobody knew the value. So I said economics. So by default, everybody took me seriously or unseriously because they thought I had graduated in economics. But I had actually graduated in military history, starting from the Mahabharata actually. And when I started my own college for entrepreneurship, the first subject, which was the most important subject, which I introduced to them, were 4 books, which were compulsory reading. The Art of War, Gorin No Show, Ardha Shastra, and the Gita.
Nice.
Because that is what life is all about.
Can you tell us a little more, since you mentioned the institution and your course, on what is its curriculum and what is it that you, is it just for ad filmmakers?
Whatever I learned in Singh school when I was there, in terms of leadership, was the fact that you lead. As a leader, you don't give orders. Because if you cannot lead and do first what you ask your people to do, then they will never follow your orders. Which is why when you turn on and command a group of people, whether it's in civilian life or whether it's in the military, you are the example. You are the cutting edge. Everybody is looking to you to see how your behavior is. How scared are you? What character you have? And how much out of your comfort zone are you willing to go because you are willing to lead? And leadership is a responsibility. And I learned that in Singh School, Kunjpura, to be very honest. We broke all the rules, but we paid for the breaking of the rules with consequences or not. And the trick was that if you're going to break a rule, you better be very careful that you don't get caught. Because only if you don't get caught and you get away with it, do you learn something from it. If you get punished for it, it causes resentment. And it causes the fact that, oh boy, how are you so stupid to get caught? Why did you want to do something where you would get caught? So the whole thing was all about strategy and tactics. Strategy and tactics is what creates leaders. Good long-term strategy, short-term tactics. You have to be very flexible on the ground and very, very long-term in your thinking and your goals. And right through my career as a civilian, as a filmmaker, filmmaking is a very funny profession. It actually has no rules. You make them up as you go along. And because it has no rules, the result is entirely up to what you do and how much you put into it and how much you understand about human nature. Because communication, the business of media and communication, is all about knowing who you are talking to. You know, though you might be talking with your voice, you are talking to an audience. And if you don't feel the audience, if you don't feel their pulse, if you don't understand their dreams, if you don't understand where they want to go, what their ambitions are, and if you don't articulate it for them in some manner or another, with passion and compassion, then you don't have an audience. Then you don't have anybody to lead. It's as simple as that.
I want to pick up from you talking about leaders. You've been a tremendous leader to millions of us on various parts of filmmaking, various parts of advertising, marketing. Prahlad is very often known as the guru of advertising, the genius from Genesis, which was the name of his company, and of course, a madman, adman, which is the title of this incredible book. I want to talk about the leaders in your life. I know you started with the colossal Shyam Benegal.
No, the first person who actually I was very influenced by was right from, well, starting with Kumkum, who actually gave me my reputation.
All the ladies.
Yes, starting with Kumkum. But then people like Mrs. Alexander, who was my principal in St. Thomas's in Dehradun, who taught me literature, English literature and poetry and stuff like that, which you'll find my book full of, because I had such a huge crush on her. I learnt everything that she taught me better than anybody else. And I was a backbencher who excelled in literature and poetry because she was my teacher. So your teachers actually, to a very large extent, mold and influence your life in different ways. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. But any male student in this lot, I'd like to know with one hand up, who wasn't in love with his school teacher. One of his school teachers. All of us went through the stages of our first crush being one of our school teachers. And they influenced us tremendously for the rest of our lives. If you actually remember anybody, you'll remember your first school teacher.
And your sports teachers. You had a whole lot of sports teachers who were very tough on you. And I think made you into who you are in many ways.
You know, my sports teacher was a chap called Butler White. I met an old St. Thomas's alumni just now at lunchtime. And he says, "Are you from St. Thomas's?" I said, "Yes." I said, "There's a chapter on Butler White." And he started laughing because obviously he's also gone through Butler White. Butler White had a little ditty about haircuts. He said, he used to grab your hair and start lifting you from the hair, reciting, "When Mr. Butler White catches you hard by the hair, he snatches you. Willy wig, 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 wig." And then to drop you back onto the ground. So we always had decent haircuts at that time, and that's what made me grow my hair. Actually, it was Mr. Butler White, because I said, now I've got rid of Mr. Butler White, I'm going to grow my hair, it doesn't matter. And another thing after that was the Sunday school. And when I was in Sunday school, Khushwant, I had a proper army haircut, and the moment I joined college, I didn't cut my hair for 6 months. I just let it grow. Now, Butler White was very instrumental in a lot of ways I deal with problems in life, is because he introduced me to sports. Because he realized that I was a very fast runner, because I used to run away from most of my problems. And he realized that I was a natural sprinter. So he taught me, he put me into athletics. And one day he calls me and says, "You're very quick on your feet. Come and join me in the afternoon in the assembly hall." And I go to the assembly hall, and all the students are putting up a boxing net, a boxing ring. And I shat. I said, "Yaar, ye boxing nahi karni maine." He said, "You know, I'm going to get pulverized." I was thin as a reed. I was a flyweight, literally. And I knew that the whole business of boxing was to get bashed up. Because there was nothing that I knew more. And basically I was scared. I was really scared of boxing. And I hated it. But he forced me into boxing. He said, "It will build your character." And I didn't believe him. I said, "Anything I'll do but boxing." He said, "No, you will box." So I learned how to box well because I didn't want to get hit. The only way to prevent from being bashed up in a boxing ring is to be a better boxer than the other person. That's the only way. And to overcome your fear and to face a fear and excel at it is a test of true character. And that was one of the most important subjects that I learned in my life, that you face your fear. Because your fear is like a shadow attached to you. the faster you run, the bigger the shadow becomes.
That is
The
true.
moment you stop and look at your shadow, it shrinks.
I wanted to go back a little bit to your accidental uh, sort of finding your feet in film. Because I feel like throughout school you had your book definitely, explicitly kind of comes across this phase till you were 17 years old and maybe thrown out
No,
of
but I
hostel.
was failed. I was basically a failure, and I had learned to live with
And
failure
many
in different
changes,
ways.
many schools, many institutions.
No, but the fact was that, a lot of us tend to give up when you fail. My failures just made me more determined to find an alternative way, because I was different from everybody else, because one, I was dyslexic. So I was a very slow learner, so I was hopeless in academics. And the second was I was a lucid dreamer. And I could sit and dream in a classroom
Fantasize.
teaching physics,
He still fantasizes.
and fantasize whatever I wanted and travel anywhere in the world in my mind because of reading. I could read a book, I could see a description of anything in the book, and I could sit in a physics class and open my eyes and be away, not be in the class, be wherever the book was. I had that tremendous capacity to be able to switch off and switch on wherever I wanted, whatever I wanted to do. And therefore, that led to a natural bit of daydreaming, fantasizing, and storytelling. And storytelling came from the fact that my mother introduced me to books. And she was a voracious reader, and she read everything. I read everything. I read everything from philosophy to porn, preferably porn. So, but all that reading gives you the capacity to daydream. Because reading is the only activity where you can read a book from an author's point of view, close the book, close your eyes, and imagine it the way he's written it. And that's the beauty of creativity, is the capacity to take that leap of faith and imagine what you're reading in pictures. So when you imagine in pictures, then you become a storyteller. And storytelling wasn't that popular or known or even respected, for that matter, in this country. The only thing that mattered was whether you were a doctor, an engineer, or an IAS officer, and whatever else. And you knew your value by the amount of dowry that was going to be given to you.
So you could have been a writer, you could have been a teacher, you could have been other things. Why did you pick film?
Because film was visual. It was prose which turns into poetry. So because of Mrs. Alexander, I love poetry. And if I wanted to be a visual communicator, I didn't want to just tell stories. I wanted to show poems in visual light, song and dance and visuals and love and adventure and everything else that was a part of my upbringing. Because I grew up in Dehradun, I was always outdoors. And because Dehradun was full of forests and animals, and we lived on farms, we went hunting to a very large extent. We learned how to, understand animals, and therefore how to understand humans. Because animals are just one step more cleverer than humans. So if you can understand an animal and you be able to stalk it, then humans are pretty easy to handle, to be very honest. They're highly predictable. So in the business of storytelling and in the business of imagining and daydreaming, I stumbled on my profession. So I had been interviewed for a multinational bank, and I had almost ready to join it. I was one interview away from my job, and they said, you pass everything, you finish your graduation, if you get a decent second class also, we'll take you with your final interview. And while I was waiting for my results to come, I was walking around Fort, and I decided to go and see the premises of this bank. And in the meantime, everybody was celebrating in the family that Kalank ko naukri mil gayi. So I was called the Kalank after the Kumkum episode. So Kalank ko naukri mil gayi, wo bhi multinational bank पे. Yeah, so hand reader or the astrologer tells you, बहुत नाम कमाएगा है, बंगला, गाड़ी, मिस मंगला, सब कुछ मिलेगा इसको, you know. So the whole family was sort of relieved as hell. Pappu pass ho gaya, so he's got a job. And then I went to see the bank, and to the middle of fort, and I went there and asked the Darwan, very smartly this Darwan. I said, "वो आपके trainees कहाँ रहते हैं? कहाँ काम करते हैं?" He said, "वो basement में." So मैं जाके देख सकता हूँ. So I went down, and in this basement, which was lit artificially and kadak air conditioning, where I could hear the traffic on the road next to me, especially the BST buses. But the lines of people dressed exactly the same way, I couldn't make out the difference between the men or the women. They were equally ugly. And they were all sitting on these calculators, these big, huge industrial calculators. There were no calculators, there were no computers at that time. Balancing ledgers. वो पूरे दिन के ट्रांजैक्शन वो एक लेजर पे हाथ से लिख रहे थे. And I looked at them, and I looked at this, and I thought to myself, I said, this is where I'm going to live and die. I'll come here before the sun rises. I'll leave after the sun sets. I'll never see the sun again. I'll be sitting with these equally ugly people like me, and there will be no inspiration, and I'll die here. So my instinct told me, my one voice in my head told me, bhag. So I got up from there, and I never went back to the bank. And everybody was so upset with me. They said, "Kalank bhi hai aur lallu bhi hai."
So what was your first foray into film?
So I
want to hurry you up because otherwise we'll lose time.
I was walking around Lodi Garden, and I saw this office in one Rattlington Road. And the whole lot of very good-looking people sitting in the lawn on a winter night, afternoon, sharing lunch from little dabbas. And I looked at them, and they were all laughing and talking and having a great time. And I looked at the board, and it said ASP, Advertising and Sales Promotion Company. So I walked into the office and said, "तुम लोग क्या करते हो यार?" So they said, "हम advertising करते हैं." He said, "वो क्या होता है?" He said, "नहीं, हम वो Bonvita or Horlicks or certain brands के लिए advertise करते हैं." So my family also, nobody knew what advertising was. So I said, "Can I go and meet somebody? Can I get a job here?" So they said, "You go talk to the receptionist." So I go to the receptionist, and her name is Farida Pandey. She is 5'10", and she's wearing a mini skirt, and she has the best pair of legs I've ever seen. And I looked around and I said, "I've come home." I said, "मैं अभी नहीं छोड़ रहा हूँ, इधर ही काम करूँगा, पीएन का काम करूँगा, मेहतर का काम करूँगा, but इधर ही काम करूँगा." So I chatted her up. It was lunch hour, and I said, "Can I get an interview with the boss?" And the boss was a fierce advertising professional called Joke Chatterjee. And he was slightly grumpy that day because he was in a bad mood. So she says, "Don't come today, come tomorrow, because you might be in a better mood. Today is in a very bad mood. तुझे कुछ नहीं होने वाला." So I said, "नहीं यार, I've come all the way. I'll may as well meet him now." So she said, "Okay." So she walks into his office, pokes her head in and says, "Jog." She doesn't call him Mr. Chatterjee. She calls him Jog. So she's obviously the teacher's pet. And I hit the right spot. So there's a gentleman here who wants to meet you for 5 minutes. So knowing that she was the boss's favorite, he couldn't say no to her. So he said, "Okay, let me finish my lunch, send her in a slightly gruff voice." So I walk in, he's reading a newspaper with a full-page color ad for a shirt company called Liberty. And they had a full-page ad where they had a man's back with a shirt on, a woman's front face without only her eyes showing, with her hands around his neck, with a pair of stilettos in her hand, which means that she was nange pair. Now, when you say barefoot in English, it doesn't mean the same thing like nange pair in Hindi. Nange pair is intimacy. Barefoot is freedom. They're very different connotations between Hindi and English. Okay? And there, in the copy was written, "We met at this very boring party. One thing led to another. And we ended up in his room, in his pad. I loved his shirt. I started with the buttons. Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor. Oops, no more buttons. Liberty shirts. Anything can happen. And he was reading this ad and he hated it. I could see it from his expression that he hated this ad. And he threw the newspaper at me and said, "What do you want advertising?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "What do you know about advertising?" I said, "Nothing, sir." So he says, "Tell me what you think of this ad." So I looked at this ad. It just blew me away. It was phenomenal. It was so visual. And I knew he hated it because he was like grumpy as hell. And I said, "Now, should I go for the job or should I go for the truth?" So he said, "What do you think?" So I felt like telling him I hate it just like you do. But I told him, I said, "Sir, I love it." He says, "You love it? It's unethical. This is bad influence on our children. What do you think this is?" So I said, "Sir, can I make an observation?" I said, "This shirt is meant for people between 18 years and 25 years old. You must be hitting about 45. So if you like this ad, the product would fail. The fact that you don't like it is that means that it has a chance of great success." So he looked at Farida, who was also standing there at that time, and said, "Show in the office." So she takes me around the office, makes me meet all the departments. There was Vicky Patel, there was a whole lot of characters from that office who really influenced my life. And then gave me a seat right outside the men's toilet. Said, "Start from day after tomorrow, this is your seat." So that's where I started, but I never left the profession till now, because every day was a challenge. Every day was phenomenal. And I never had to work a single day in my life from that day onwards because it was a party.
That
Because
is
I was
so
a natural.
lucky. That is so lucky. When you shifted to, when you joined Shyam Benegal as an assistant and also on his advertising films, you were in a space where Mr. Benegal at that time was making like path-breaking art cinema. You know, whether it was
Not really. When I joined,
not really making path-breaking cinema, or
no,
not
you
really,
hadn't started yet.
or hadn't started.
He was actually the head of the film department in ASP Bombay, and I was working in ASP Delhi. And one day he came to Delhi, and he was the local hero because he made the best ad films in the country at that time. And everybody was crowding around him. And in Delhi, we didn't even understand what ad films were. All of it was given to Bombay to do. So I sucked up to him and I said, "Sir, mujhe bhi seekhna hai. Will you take me to Bombay?" So he said, "No." So then I went to Jog Chatterjee and I said, "Sir, one day we'll need to make films from Delhi. Right now we can only make them in Bombay. So why don't you send me to Bombay on a training, 6-month training, and I'll come back and set up a department for you." So he harammed and hawed and all. He says, "I won't pay you anything more than what you're being paid now." And I was being paid little less than the PN was because I'd liked the Liberty ad. And he
remembered that.
which we had.
He remembered that.
Yes. And so I went to Bombay with 350 rupees as my salary. And that was it. And I found a PG digs. I ate in that. I couldn't afford to travel even by bus, so I had to walk to office every day. But I never regretted it because it was such a tremendous learning. Every day was a learning. Every day was a lesson. And Shyam taught us one basic thing, which was humility. Because there was no hierarchy. There was no designation. All his assistants were given numbers and they were called slaves. So there was slave number one.
What was your number?
Slave number 2, slave number 3, I was slave number 5. Okay, the lowest order. And we had to actually read a contract and sign it, which was a letter for appointment. Appointment letter was a slave contract, which said slaves can't ask for a raise, slaves can't ask for leave, slaves cannot turn around and fall sick without a doctor's certificate, slaves cannot do this. There were many rules. And the last one said, slaves cannot resign, they can only be sold. So that was the tradition that we actually grew up in. And I'll thank him for that because we never thought that we were somebody who couldn't do some other job. Everybody had to do every job, whether it was cleaning shit or whether it was dressing up somebody for a shot. You had to learn everything from scratch, everything that came your way. And you were a slave. So you couldn't even say, no, this is not my job. There was no such luck. And we continued that tradition. When I set up Genesis, then all my people were also called slaves. And everybody's job was everybody else's job. So there was no assistant director, there was no casting director, there was no script writer, there was no editor, there was no director, or nothing. Everybody did everything. And what I'll say for that tradition the Sham gave us, was that every single person who graduated from the Prahlad Kakkar School of Hard Knocks is a huge success today. And I count my success in life not from my body of my work, because that is time-bound, but from the people who are trained, because they make me proud, because they did better than I did, because they're better filmmakers, better professionals than I could ever be. And that my wife will stand in order of, because she started as my slave, ended up as the boss, and now, I'm a share outside the house and a chua inside.
I still want you to answer the question of how you didn't graduate to cinema when Sham did. Because he came out with Ankur, Manthan, so many great films and so many great stars were born at that time. And what made you stick to ad filmmaking?
The process, we all went through a process, because Sham's first film was Ankur, it was our first film as well. We were slaves on Ankur, we were the director of Ankur. But we went through the whole process with him of doing feature films. But at that time, I just started becoming an independent director, as an ad film director, and getting known for it. Getting known for my work, because to a very large extent I followed my instinct. I followed my gut, I followed my dreams, and I followed what I read to a very large extent in terms of the leaps of faith and imagination that I took in the course of my work. And it was different from everybody else's, because everybody else followed a script. I never followed a script.
I know that. Over
No,
multiple films.
I became notorious for it, because a lot of people didn't give me work because they said the script change kar dega. And they wanted to stick to the script because it was research, it was done everything. And I had one belief. I said, research is a sure way of telling you what not to do. Because if research said this script is going to work, 100% is not going to work. Because a communication and a story is spontaneous. It's instinct, it's a gut. You've got to understand, you've got to be a storyteller, you have to have the imagination to be able to not change the script totally, don't change the storyline, but to change the way it's delivered.
But the challenges of making and telling a story, marketing an object, getting an audience, making it a retail object and also memorable is a challenge.
And creating a brand.
And creating a brand in 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and 30 seconds.
But that's the discipline that Sham taught us. And that discipline was that your hero is always your brand. You can use Amitabh Bachchan, you can use Shah Rukh Khan, you can use whoever you want. But they are not the heroes of the film. They're the side cast. The hero of your communication in advertising is a very, very difficult job, where the brand is the hero. And what he taught me, which is what I teach all my students now, is that brand is not an inanimate object. It's not a glass of water. There's a human being that lives inside the brand. He thinks, he loves, he hates, he feels good, he laughs. He laughs at anything that you want to laugh at. And if you do not create that brand character and stick with it, your audience does not identify with your brand at all. Because audiences don't identify with commodities. They identify with personalities and with human beings.
And an emotion, I guess.
And if you don't look at your brand as a person, with definite likes and dislikes, and consistently, then you don't have a brand.
So you made so many films which were iconic, and most of them have a tagline. like even today's topic, the title for today's talk is Zing thing. And there was, of course, 2 minutes for Maggie, and there was, so many others. What is your favorite? Which was your most powerful?
I think the most powerful line that I didn't only come up with, but it was a team thing. A lady called Anuja Chauhan, who's also now a writer. She came up with this line. It said, "Dil mange mo," for Pepsi.
Pepsi.
And the line was all about dreaming. The line was all about the future. The line was not about today. The line was not about yesterday. The line was about what you dream about. What does your heart want? And what your heart wants, actually, if you look at it from your own mind, what your mind wants is a different thing from what your heart wants. Your mind is a calculated risk. Your heart is open. And what your heart says is to add value to whatever you do. What your mind says, your success is counted with how much money you earn. Wrong.
Prahlad has a very fickle heart. He has
I have a great heart because I gave it to everybody else.
He has a massive interest in other things. He started Prithvi Cafe, which we all know as the Prithvi Theatre Cafe. Many food endeavors, became a good chef.
No, but I'm
Bought
going
a
to tell you
brothel.
about
I'm going to wait.
my
You have to
favorite
wait for me to
restaurant,
finish.
which
He
you all
bought a
love.
brothel. He bought a brothel in Bombay. We all had to go and see it. And he said, "This is my brothel, now change your clothes." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Yeah, somebody needs to fill it, needs to work. I spend so much money." Finally, he has a wonderful restaurant called Love Fools there. He has a cigar brand out of the sheer passion of endlessly smoking cigars, named after
And not being able to
a
afford to
winning
buy them.
horse, and not being able to afford them. He accidentally became a diver, started a diving school in Lakshadweep. We all started with him in 93, 94. We're all divers now. Mitali is a master diver and instructor. But these are legions of things done which changed other people's lives. And not just for a moment, not an experience, not a sudden sort of event. This is life-changing for all of us, being part of his life.
No, but my favorite restaurant was a friend of mine started a Punjabi dhaba, and we decided on
PK
its
that
name,
tune.
and we said, what is the terms of endearment in Punjabi? Like say, darling is in English. How can you substitute the word darling in Punjabi? And then I realized when I was in Delhi that every third word was this word. It was a term of endearment. It was an abuse. It was endearment. It was adjective. It was descriptive. It was whatever you wanted it to be. So we named the dhaba Papa Pancho.
He did very well, actually.
And believe me, every orphaned Punjabi in Bombay found his way there. And said, this is home. Because not only is it a term of endearment, but also the food is exactly like your home food. And that's the unity of that. And it's been 15 years, and we've been houseful. And we realized that because we created a brand around a dal. So say, if ITC can create a brand around its dal, why can't we? So when we didn't have any money for advertising, we distributed a cooler of dal to 400 homes around the restaurant. And said, and wrote in a little note, said, a dhaba lives and dies by its dal. If you like the dal, you love everything else. If you don't like the dal, don't bother to come. It was, from the next day it was full. Till today.
I know we're out of time, so I'm just going to ask if anybody has a specific question. One or two, if any.
I think he's floored everybody. Oh, there is a question.
Can we have a mic to you?
Storytelling, you say, after reading so many books in your life and having made amazing movies, if there is a difference between the two, or are they both the same? Just what would you say about storytelling?
See, the stories come from books, but the poetry comes from film. So when you translate a piece of prose into visual poetry, that is the business of filmmaking. So the filmmaking is dreaming in all three dimensions. Not just in the writing, also in the imagining, and also in the performance from your actors, and how much value of yourself can you add to that film. Because every director who's a great director, you look at any director if you follow him, you'll find a certain consistency in the colors he uses, in the people he casts, in the characters that he develops. They all come from personal experiences. Which is why if you give the same story to 4 different directors, you'll actually get 4 different films with the same story. And each one is a part of the director's life, of how he looks at his own life. So if you want to examine the character of a human being who's a director, take 5 of his best films and watch them. You'll be able to psychoanalyze him completely.
I think it's impossible. Kali dal is a
Kali dal.
Punjabi.
Well, go taste it.
It's impossible to contain Prahlad into 1 hour. It's impossible to contain Prahlad into a lifetime. And it's certainly impossible to contain Prahlad into this book.
So the book is really all about me, like a fly on the wall, looking back at our life and wondering, how one human being in one lifetime can be in so much trouble and get away with it.
That is absolutely true. Thank you very much,
The
everybody.
book is available in the bookshop, so do grab your copies, and I think Prahlad will agree to sign them.
I'm sure he will.
Yes, I will. Even though I'm dyslexic,